scope today. So just as we get started, just want to welcome everyone from across the country and actually around the world. We're now getting quite a good response to our webinars, and people are joining us from all over. Some quick logistics. Your hosts today, myself as always, and today we've got Siobhan joining us on the technical front to help support. So if you do have any questions, comments, thoughts, if you're having any difficulties, please just pop into the chat window there and send a note. Siobhan's going to be monitoring that. As well, we have our question window down the bottom. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in. Again, Siobhan will be monitoring that and making sure that we address those at the end of the session. For part of your interaction, at the top, you have a little raise your hand icon. So if you need some attention, or if you've got a question or something and something's not working, raise your hand. Again, Siobhan will be monitoring that for us and kind of let us know. As I mentioned, we have the chat window, so as we go through our session today, some interactions, you can type in your chat there. And finally, we are always welcoming applause. Okay, so our opening thoughts today. Oh, sorry, just a quick response to Lou. Didn't get a dial-in number. We do all of our webinars with just the voice over IP, and we do record these so that you'll have them for later if you want to review them. Now, when I was putting this together, as I always do, I put an opening thought in, and I've actually used both of these quotes in the past, and I use them a lot in my training, and I thought both of them were relevant, and in particular, when I looked at the two of them and thought, which one do I pick, I thought they actually support each other. So the first one is, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. So one of the focuses of today's session when we talk in terms of scope is we want to separate out the solution, or the problem and the solution, okay? And I think this is a big area where people struggle because they focus too much on the solution and they haven't thought through what the problem is. And then the second one, which layers on top of this, is make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I'm a huge fan of this. And when I look back at my experience and my success stories, I see that, you know, where I really had my big successes in my world as a project manager was really very much from a when I made things as simple as possible and really just tailor fit the solution to the client's needs. And this is where we're going to really be exploring the theme of you know, how do we come up with, you know, something that tailor fits the client's needs? And if we don't know the needs, how can we possibly do that? So my first question today, I'm just going to pop into a question window here. Let's open that up. So the first question today is, I'd like you to define what challenges you face when defining scope. So we have a chat box down below the slide there if you just want to pop in there and answer that question. What challenges do you face when you're defining scope? Starting to get some answers coming in. Just give you a few more minutes. Okay. Let's take a look at what we've got here. I love this first one that popped up. I'm just going to scroll back up here. Just trying to catch that name there. Shabit. If I got your name pronounced incorrectly, I do apologize. Unclear requirements. And I love the first one right out of the gate. Excuse me, talking about requirements. And this is really going to be an important thing that we're going to look at today, which is we really need to know what the need is, what the requirement is. Stakeholders don't know what they want. Beautiful, love it. Yes, stakeholders have a hard time really, thinking that through and defining that. And then we get into the different conflicting needs from different functions, absolutely. Especially in the larger, more complex environments, um, you know, getting stakeholder agreement. And then, of course, we get into that changing needs, the changing requirements. We're in this constant world of change. I mean, we're hearing this all the time. Change is the new norm. And one of the criticisms of PMBOK and PMI and Waterfall is that it's too rigid. And ironically, if you read the text, it's actually not said to be rigid. And we're gonna explore that a little bit as well. Lack of information, expectations are not clear, deadlines are not defined. Yes, love it, beautiful. From Jim, people need to know what they want the end product to look like. Yes, beautiful, absolutely, and that can be quite difficult. And again, if we don't have the problem understood at the beginning, maintaining it throughout from Kim. Thank you so much, Kim. That's beautiful. Um, Scope definition is not a one-time thing. This is not a you do it once, it's done, right? This is a multi thing, and we need to make sure that we're staying abreast of that as we go. It's a lack of information, expectations not clear. People not doing so do those ones. Communications from stakeholders, yes, 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 yes. Communication is so key. From Melody, thank you. Um, Unclear customer goals, stakeholders not being knowledgeable from Suzanne. Oh, that's a beautiful one, Suzanne. We need to make sure we're engaging the right stakeholders. And too often times what I see people doing, and I've been guilty of this myself, is you talk to the stakeholder who's signing the check. And meanwhile, we need to be talking to those stakeholders that are going to be actually using the thing, that are experiencing those frontline staffers who are going to live with and benefit from whatever it is we're doing. Just going to do a quick scan through these. Customer client not completely clear on the requirements or needs, absolutely. Stakeholders not willing to spend much time defining requirements and pushing to jump into execution ASAP. Oh, Alex, that is a wonderful one. I often use the analogy of going for a drive as a project. It has a beginning and has an end. And when I do my classes abroad, I ask my students, say, well, how effective would I be getting down here to, let's say, Dallas, Texas, if I didn't have a plan? I mean, when we have a plan, I've thought it out ahead of time. I've booked my flights. I've figured out when I'm going to leave the house, what route I'm going to take to the airport, and so on. Imagine if I took the approach of no time to plan, just do, and I hop in my car and start driving. Now I know my destination, it's Dallas, Texas, but I have no idea of how I'm going to get there. I have no plan. How effective are we going to be, right? So in my humble opinion, the times that you are more constrained on time, more constrained on, we've got to get this done quickly, those are the times that you want to be, doing the plan. So some great ones there. Thank you, guys. Our next question. Now, this question actually layers on the first question. What challenges are caused when requirements are not clearly understood? So I'm just going to pop that question open. So the first question was, what are the challenges in defining the requirements? Now I'm asking you, when they're not defined properly or not clearly understood, what happens? So I'll get you to just pop into that box at the bottom there. And yay, Tracy, thank you so much. Perfect answer right out of the gate again. Okay, so the solution does not meet the needs. And if we're not meeting the needs, we're wasting time and money. Too many project changes, change controls, yes, from Lou. And then we get into scope creep. We're going to be talking about scope creep. We see scope creep popping up a couple times here. Delays in the project, solution not meeting the objectives, right? Not meeting the needs exactly. That's an interesting one, scope drift from Eric. I like that term, scope drift, instead of scope which equals, of course, cost. Issues uncovered with testing. We want to be figuring out our issues ahead of time, trying to avoid those challenges when we get into testing. Delays, and I love Chantel's one, delays, unhappy customers. Yeah, it's really, customer satisfaction is very key, and we're going to be exploring that a little bit. A lot of change, absolutely. Rework, scope creep, cost overruns, schedule overruns, absolutely. Also requirement defects from Setter. Yeah, absolutely. That's totally, you guys are all over this. This is great. Okay. So when we look at the challenges, when we don't properly understand the project, and I pulled this quote out of PMBOK 5th edition, define and mature project scope. And really that's what defining the project scope is all about. So yes, we do want to define it, but we also mature it. And this is all part of progressive elaboration. And I just realized I wasn't sharing my webcam. Sorry about that, folks. Define and mature our project scope. And this is all about making sure that we not only define it, but also mature it. So we don't need to have the full, totally clear scope definition on day one, right? Through progressive elaboration, through iteration, we can refine and detail that as we go. And you take that concept to the extreme, and you're now starting to talk about Agile, right? So, the way I look at Agile and Waterfall is I look at it more of a continuum than a one or the other. And now it really becomes a question of how Agile-like is going to be my project and how Waterfall-like is going to be my project. So hence, if we're doing a construction project, we're building a house, a garage, something like that, we can be very Waterfall. We can be very much define it right down to every last little detail before we break ground. You're doing something more innovative, especially when you get into high innovation, you're going to be much more Agile-like because you're going to take a few tentative steps, figure out what's going on. And this was done when I participated in the human-powered helicopter project, Atlas. The two gentlemen leading this, they're PhDs in aeronautical engineering from the University of Toronto. They don't know project management, but intuitively they knew the research needed to be done in an Agile method and production could be done in a waterfall method. And the way they phrase it is you cannot schedule innovation. So what they would do is they would schedule the production, but then the innovation pieces, they would leave that flexible. And it worked brilliantly. So some of the challenges, and we saw this come out in the answers, scope creep, the constant changing scope, customer not accepting the deliverables, so hence that unhappy customer that we saw, the multiple change requests, overtime, over budget, and just plain frustration. A big part of what I see as project management is about reducing our frustration. It's about how do we make this thing flow smoother, flow easier? How do we make this come together in a way that is going to be acceptable both for our customers as well as for the team, as well as for senior management and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to ask this question now, and we've been having these as open questions. I'm going to do this one as a poll, so let me just pop into that. And I'm just going to open the poll. How do you define scope creep? So I want you to just go ahead and vote. How do you define scope creep? Got about seeing quite a few votes coming in. This is great. Thank you. So give it a few more moments. We've got close to half the people voted, so I'm going to give it a few more moments to get a few more in here. We'll get to about 3/4 and we'll end the poll. I see some of you have realized you can change your vote, which is fine, absolutely. Okay, so we'll give it a few more moments. Okay, I'm just going to end the poll and I'm going to broadcast the results. Few votes. Oh no, I don't want that. Back to poll. You should be seeing the poll results. And I'm happy to report that the small changes, no effect to costs and time, was 0. So yes, that is true. Those are not scope changes. Now, the majority of the votes came in. We got 11% of small changes that do not affect cost. Sorry, 26%, excuse me, affect cost time. And then, which the one I call the right answer is the unapproved changes to project scope at 62%. So we have a very savvy group today. Now, small changes that are beneficial to the project, 4.67%. all changes that we do should be beneficial to the project. However, any change that is unapproved, that is technically what scope creep is. So when we look at scope creep, it's about an unapproved change. The second we have an approved change, it's no longer creep, it's a scope change, right? We had a few people say small changes that are not beneficial to the project, and yes, they often scope creep often does have a negative effect. But the reality is most scope creep is happening because someone thinks it's a good idea and they kind of push it through. Maybe they just do it on their own without kind of consulting or getting permission. And your biggest tool for dealing with scope creep is your scope change. So you know what? Get those changes approved, and then you've got scope creep under control. So it's not bad. Change is inevitable. And in fact, change is actually a good thing, because imagine that we are doing a project. The environment has changed, and we're not being responsive and adjusting our scope to meet that new changing requirements. And really, this is the essence of Agile, and this is why Agile does tend to be so effective, because it is very responsive to those changes, and we're constantly redefining the scope and defining it. Now, as I was preparing for this, I was on my train ride home yesterday, and I stumbled across a copy of PM Network from October 2013, and there was a great article in there around defining scope. So I read it on the train on the way home, and I grabbed this little quote out of it. Felipe was one of the PMs featured in the article, and his quote was, "Requirements are always in a state of flux." And that's something project managers have to embrace. And I love those words, right? So first of all, yes, requirements are in a state of flux. Things are constantly changing. That's our new world. But then he goes on to say that PMs need to embrace this, not just accept it, not just put up with it, but actually embrace it, right? To expect all requirements perfectly defined and static prior to starting is a recipe for failure. And I have long since agreed with that sentiment and professed that sentiment. So it's really nice to see PM Network, publishing that. And that's something, whether we're doing Agile or Waterfall, we need to embrace. And now it just becomes a question of, what methodology are we leveraging and kind of working in there. Okay, so our next poll question: how do you define project success? I'm just going to open that poll up. So how would you define project success? So the poll is now open. And this time I've actually let you click a couple of options. So if you think project success is 2 of 3 of those items, then go ahead and click on 2 or 3. So give it a few more moments. Very interesting results coming in. Okay. I'm going to start broadcasting these results, and I'm just going to end the poll. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've got. Now, early in the voting, the third item, client accepts the deliverable, was taking an early lead. And it's still the number one item at 72%, which is great. We've got a very savvy group today, which is really nice to see. That, in my humble opinion, is your number one key factor when it comes to did we have a successful project. And I want you to think about this from the standpoint of from the customer's perspective. Think about what's going to cause the customer to not accept the deliverable. And I think this really goes back to some of the answers that we had right at the very beginning, where it did not meet the customer's needs, right? So when I asked the second question around, what is the challenges caused by poor definition of scope? And it was really about it does not meet the needs. So as the customer, if you're playing the role of customer, what's going to cause you to say, I do not accept this deliverable? And in very simple terms, it did not meet your needs. So that, in my humble opinion, is really the number one key. Now I'm going to deal with the other three below it first, and then we're going to finish off with on time and on budget last. Now the team is still speaking to you. We had 15% voting on that one. You know what? It is an important success criteria because let's just run through a quick scenario. We've delivered the product. The customer accepts it. They've signed off. You've absolutely PO'd the team. Half of them have left the company. The ones that stayed won't talk to you anymore. We don't have success. We need to look beyond the borders of our own project. We need to be thinking a little bit more strategically. We need to be thinking a little bit more holistically around how are we going to define that success? Well, part of it is that we have an intact team that's able and capable to move forward and work together again. So I do consider that as one of my success criteria. The client wants you for your next project. Now, this success criteria, there's 27% on this one. Again, another one that I put into my bucket of if I was asked to vote on this, this would be one of the ones I'm checking off. You know, we want to stay employed in very simple terms. We also want stakeholders who are willing to work with us as strategic partners as opposed to working in an adversarial role. I am amazed, sitting around the boardroom table, we're all wearing the same lapel pin. You know, we're all from the same company. And yet it feels like you're in a frickin' war, right? You're battling with your team. And I've done this actually in a meeting. I've stopped and said, we all work for the same company, right? We're all on the same team together here because it's feeling very adversarial. Now, the better relationship you can develop with your client, internal, external client, the better relationship you can develop with them, the more they're going to be they're going to view you as a strategic partner. And as they view you as a strategic partner, what's going to happen now is your interactions with them are going to become more collaborative and less adversarial. And by doing this, doing things like defining the requirements at the beginning is going to be let's work together as opposed to fighting with each other on this. And it's definitely a much better day. And there was a post on LinkedIn just a week or two ago that I stumbled across. And the gentleman posting, it was in the PM forum, and he was saying about calling it a peace room instead of a war room. And in his company, when he first started there, and he was introduced to this concept of a war room, he says, "Why are we calling it a war room? Why don't we call it a peace room?" And they actually changed their language, and they call it a peace room. And he said, you know what, they got a lot more done, a lot better, because they were now working in this kind of collaborative fashion. The last one is deliverable is being used. And 55% of the vote was on that one. And thank you guys for that so much, because that is a very key success factor. I'm amazed at the number of people I can find, the number of projects I can easily find where the deliverable was created, it was built, but then it never went into production. It never went into use. And whether that's a piece of software, whether that is, a training manual, whatever that looks like. We need to make sure that on a larger scale basis, as we're doing our stuff and we're delivering our deliverables, that those deliverables are actually being put into use. Okay, so I want to finish off with the two, and I kind of refer to these ones as the elephants in the room, on time and on budget. We had 67.5% and 70% respectively on these two. Now, this is the common answer. I ask people, what's project success? And they say, on time, on budget. Well, there's a problem with that. If we only look at on time and on budget, if we have a client who's not accepting the deliverable, on time and on budget doesn't matter. If we have a team who is not speaking to you anymore, who's walking away, who's leaving the company, again, on time and on budget really doesn't matter that much. You got a client who doesn't want to work with you again, the deliverables not being put into use, which really is an extension of the client accepts the deliverable. The on time and on budget doesn't matter. Now, I'm not saying on time and on budget does not matter, because it does. It absolutely does. However, it is not necessarily a key success criteria. We need to be looking at our projects and asking the very, very tough question of what truly matters. What are the priorities? And we're going to be exploring this in a little bit. But if I manage my project to a cost and a timeline alone, at the sacrifice of the other elements, I'm going to create failure. Okay? And this is really what is kind of behind the whole scope thing. We need to make sure that what we're doing is we're figuring out what is truly needed and hence delivering a product that addresses that need, and that's what's going to get your client to accept. And in my history, and I've looked at my history, I've looked at other people's examples and case studies. You can find case study after case study where things were delivered late, where they're delivered over budget, they were still considered a success because the client accepted it, it met the need, it was put into use, and there was a benefit. Now, we do have to tailor that with the whole concept of, what are the constraints that I need to work within. So when I'm working on a regulatory project, for example, and saw this a lot in the banking industry, highly regulated environment, where we had to there was one project we had to deliver at midnight on December the 31st. And yes, we did bring the team in at, excuse me, we did bring the team in at 10 p.m. on December 31st to roll out that implementation. Now I pushed back. I pushed back to the regulator and said, can we? And it was like, no, it had to be done. So you want to be thinking about those when you look at, what is project success? And really the biggest thing of project success is the customer accepts the solution. And without that, you've got nothing else. We have the effective transition of deliverables, so it's now gone into production. Completing it within the acceptable levels. This is the time and cost piece, right? So, your Y2K projects, your regulatory type projects, you can't afford to be late. Okay, fine, great. Let's take a look at that. Those projects often go over budget, but that's acceptable. Client accepts it. We have the effective transition. We move forward, right? Now, in our lessons learned, yes, we should be looking at, why did we go over budget, by how much, and, what can we do better? Absolutely. And then our stakeholders are eager to start the new project and the team wants to work together again. Doesn't mean we necessarily like each other, but we haven't burnt those bridges. When we poll PMs and say, what are the number one challenges that you face in general? One of the top things that always comes up, scope, of course, but also resources. They're not getting the resources. So I want you to think about this from the standpoint of, you've just finished your project. Your team is dispersing. What are they saying about you? What are they saying about the experience? Are they walking away going, thank God that's over, run to the hills? Or are they walking away saying, that was a great experience and gee, I'd love to work with you again? Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to announce your next project. You're going to say, hey, I'm doing project 2.0, right? We did 1.0 last year, I'm doing 2.0 this year. Do you want those same team members to be volunteering and walking forward with their hand up saying, pick me? Or do you want them to be hiding? Do you want them to be running and hiding? Right? Same thing with your stakeholders, right? If you can start project number 2, having left project number 1 with a good experience, your stakeholders are going to be receiving you and going, oh, great, there's Joe again. Yay, we've got him on the project. I can relax a little, right? And again, we get back into that collaborative, working together thing. Oh, sorry. I wanted to expand a little bit on the roles of customer, definition of the role of customer and definition of stakeholder. Stakeholder, defined by PMBOK, is anyone who's impacted by the project or perceives themselves to be impacted by the project. So your team members, your customers who are receiving it, the end users, the larger groups outside of that, those are all stakeholders. The customer, however, is a very specific role. The customer or client, using those two terms interchangeably, they are the one who accepts the solution when you're done. Now, the sponsor is the person who supports the project. They provide funding, they provide resource support, that kind of thing. So what you want to do is think about who is your customer. Now, your customer and your end user are also usually two different people. Because remember, your customer is who's accepting, who's doing the sign-off at the end. Now, the customer will usually look to their end users, right? Because they're going to engage the end users for saying what are the requirements, do some testing, that kind of thing. Figure out who's playing those roles. And I'm using the term role very carefully because oftentimes the customer and the sponsor are the same person, but they're playing two different roles. And one of the keys here is that we need to be defining what is the acceptance criteria at the very beginning of the project so that we know when we get to the end of the project, we know exactly what we're building towards. I'd use the example of the human-powered helicopter, a project I was fortunate enough to be involved with. And the acceptance criteria was very, very specific. I mean, this is a classic engineering challenge. And it was a flight of 1 minute, 3 meters high, stay within a 10-meter box. Everything else was whatever, right? So it was very specific. Here's the acceptance from the customer. The second that we did that, they signed and we won the prize. So the tighter you can define it. Now, in that scenario, it's a very simple acceptance criteria. Oftentimes, the acceptance criteria gets very big and complex. And this is where we want to try to live those words by Albert Einstein of make it as simple as possible, but not too simple. And that becomes a lot of the art of defining scope and the art of managing the projects. But I really just wanted to be very clear that the customer is the person who does the accepting at the end. Figure out who that person is, figure out what they're going to be using for their acceptance criteria. So we're going to now start to decompose the scope a little bit. And we're going to look at project versus product scope. Now, project scope is the work, product scope is features and functions. And this is kind of an important piece because when we look at the tools and techniques that we use, work breakdown structure, for example, that's really about defining the project scope. What's the work? What are the things that we want to do? And our brains tend to work very tactically. So as soon as you start talking to someone about how we're going to do X, Y, and Z, the kind of normal immediate reaction is to jump straight down to the lowest level of, oh, we need to write code, or we need to, build this thing, or, that kind of stuff. And meanwhile, we necessarily haven't even thought through what is the product itself. Right? So if you are doing that and figuring out what are the product features and functions before you figure out how you're going to get to those product features and functions, then you're actually doing it very correctly. And we look at it from a kind of a flowchart perspective. We first of all need to start by defining the real need. And I love that terminology, real need, because when we look at what is the need, we're often told the symptoms. Let's figure out what is the real root cause analysis behind this. And this is where a business analyst, a BA, is worth their weight in gold, because you got a good BA in there. They're going to help the customer work through that. And that is a very difficult thing to do, to work through that. That's going to help them define the end product. So we figure out the need first, we define the end product, we then determine the priorities of the project. What is number one priority, number two priority? And when we're talking about priorities, I'm not talking about features of trading them off. I'm talking about time versus scope versus cost. Describe the organizational context, figure out your PM, order of magnitude estimates, and then prepare your charter. So this is all in that initial piece. And we're going to focus in on these three elements here. So when we think about this, the need defines the scope, the product scope defines the project scope, and the business need is the why. If you do not have your why, you have no foundation. You're building on sand. You need to figure out why you are doing this project. Figure that out clearly. And this is where the describe it as simply as possible, but not too simple, really comes to play. It's really about what is that true essence of the business need that I need to get at here. And if I can figure that out and keep that front of mind, the rest of it all comes very clear. The product scope is the what. The what is the features and functions. The what is the product. The what is the thing that we're going to deliver. And then finally, the project scope is the how, or the work that's going to get there. And I didn't actually set up a formal question for this, but I'd like to just pose this question from your experience, and just use the chat window to answer this. From your experience, where does most projects begin? Is it at the why, defining the need? Is it at the what, defining the product? Or is it at the how, defining the work? And my question for you is not where should it begin, but where do they usually begin? So just pop into the chat window there and just type in one word: why, what, or how. Where do you see projects typically beginning? Cool. So the results are not surprising me at all. We've got a relatively savvy group, so I'm seeing a few Ys popping in from Steve, from Kristen, from John, from Setter, which is great, and that's where they should be beginning. From my experience and from a lot of experience out there, I see it actually beginning more at the what level, and even surprisingly sometimes the how. So we see that the majority of the people who just popped into the chat there, and thank you for that, the vast majority, they're typed in what. We tend to start our projects at the what phase. And we often justify this by saying, well, the client has already gone through the why and they've told us what they want, so we just go and do that, right? But have they really properly thought it through? I like to use the analogy of someone walks into a car dealer and says, I need a minivan. Well, you don't actually need a minivan. No one needs a minivan. The need behind that is transportation. So what they're really saying to you is, well, I need transportation. And then the next question now becomes, well, what are the details? Number of seats and things like that. So that's the details of the product scope. That's the details of the need, but we really didn't get down to the true need, which is, again, transportation. Now we tie this back to time and cost, and we are far too quick to de-scope our projects to meet a timeline, to meet a budget. And we de-scope our minivan here, and we're now not putting an engine in, right? We're delivering you a minivan. It's got doors and windows and a radio and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't run. It doesn't drive somewhere. So we haven't met the need. This is where the true failures happen. The why defines the what defines the how. And there should be a traceability between those three elements. Okay. So when we talk about defining the project, figure out the real need. What's the problem, need, or opportunity? Why are we doing this? If you don't address that need, all is lost. Address that need, the product now starts to become kind of irrelevant. Figure out the end product. What is the acceptance criteria? And usually the acceptance criteria is, does it meet my need? So if my need is to get better, faster customer response, for example, then whatever product I put in place, the deliverable now is going to be tested from the standpoint of, are my customers getting a faster response? Hence, when you go through a drive-through these days, there's a little timer window up showing how long it's taking for each of those. Finally, the priorities. And this is all about the balancing act. What's our number one priority? I use my example of my regulatory for this one, saying time was number one, scope was number two, and cost was number three. You've got to figure out what your priorities are so that you can then manage that to that. Imagine if we were to flip that around and say cost was the one and time was number three, and you're now going to throw money at it to get it done on time. You're not going to have a happy customer, right? So we need to understand those priorities. And the priorities, much like the scope, can change throughout your project. So we need to be aware of that and manage it as we go. At the end of the day, it's really all about hitting the target. Right? Now, that target sometimes includes a time window. Sometimes it includes a price window. But at its essence, we need to figure out the why, because that's the true target that we're hitting, not the product. The product is the method or vehicle that's going to get us there. And I put this quote in from George Sinataya, I think that's how you pronounce his name. A fanatic is one who redoubles his efforts when he has forgotten his aim. And this is, what is the purpose of what we're doing here? Have we lost our focus? We need to retain that focus on why we're doing this, because if we're not meeting that, then like I say, all is lost. Okay, so let's take this back to PMBOK. Let's take a look at our processes. In the scope knowledge area, we have 6 of them: plan, scope management, collect requirements, define scope, create WBS, validate scope, and control scope. For today's discussion, we're going to focus on 3 of them, which is collect requirements, define scope, and create WBS. These folks lay the foundation for all the other stuff that's coming up. When you look at the outcomes of create WBS, the activities, the work packages, that's what everything is based on. All your scheduling, all your costing, all your resourcing, your timelines, all of that is based on this. So without that, we really kind of don't have much. Let's take a look at these in turn. Now, I'm going to do a quick little alignment activity. What I'd like you to do, and we'll just use the chat window here for this one, just pop into the chat. And I'm going to say a word, and I want you to tell me what first pops into your mind, and just take a few moments to draw it. Okay? So if you have a piece of paper handy, or just kind of draw it in your mind, and then give it a few moments, because I'd like you to kind of think through it a little bit first before you start answering, so that other people don't get influenced by your answer. So here's the word. The word is fly, F-L-Y. Fly. And I'd like you to think about what that means to you. If you have a piece of paper handy, do a quick little sketch, and then pop into the chat and tell us what you drew. Okay, we've got some really cool answers coming in today. First one, Nancy, an eagle. So we got some eagles, some airplanes, soaring wings. I love this one from Annette, airborne person slash thing. So, Superman, Superwoman flying through the air, defying gravity. I love it. Um, Oh, interesting, Chantel. A sense of freedom or adrenaline. So more of an emotion than an actual thing. That'd be interesting. I love it. And from Caitlin, a recurring dream. Um, Dawn, I love your answer. Zipper. We rarely get a zipper. Yay! So when we do this in class, what do we usually get? We usually get about a third of the room doing birds. We get about a third of the room doing bugs. About a third of the room doing airplanes. Um, and that's kind of the normal. Rarely do we get a zipper. I mean, I've been doing this exercise in multiple classes for the past 7 years, and I think I've had like 3 zippers in all that time. And then we get some Superman once in a while, someone with a cape, that kind of thing. Um, Here's the thing, though. Are we all in the same alignment? Do we all know why we're doing this project? What is the objective? What is the where we're headed with this, right? So if I say to you, well, we're going to create a fly, and some people think airplanes and birds and bugs, and meanwhile I'm talking zipper. Well, out of all of our responses, we only had one person in alignment with that. So it's you know, this is what it's all about when we talk about defining scope. So when we talk about collecting the requirements is the business need. So when you see the word requirements, I want you to think in terms of business need. Now, um, the business need that we need, like what is that need that's there? So when you see 5.2 collect requirements, it's about collecting the business requirements. In the IT world, we often use the word requirements to define the scope or not the scope, excuse me, the feature requirements of the software that we're building or the system that we're building. I want you to think in terms of what is the business need. The product scope, that is the 5.3 is define the scope. So that's where we're actually sitting down and saying, all right, let's figure out the features and functions of this thing that we're going to have when we're done. And then the WBS, this is about the how. This is the project scope as to how we're going to get there. Okay. Now, when we define scope, we put this into the scope statement. And this defines the what. It's the requirements. It's what's in scope. It's what's out of scope. And in scope and out of scope is really, really super key. Because when we define what's in scope, there's lots of assumptions made. So I may say to you, okay, well, I'm going to go and buy a brand new car. And what I want is in scope. Well, I want a 4-door sedan. Maybe I want all-wheel drive or whatever. And I start to think about those things and I list off the features. But then there's also a bunch of features that are just automatic, that are just things that are going to be there regardless, like airbags, for example, or anti-lock brakes. You look at any modern car today, they all come with this as standard features, right? So I wouldn't necessarily list those as in scope because I'm kind of assuming that they're going to be there. Now, if they're not there, when I go to accept my car when it's done, I'm going to say, hey, dude, where's the airbags? Like, what up? So out of scope is a great way to help define the boundaries of the project. It's a great way to help weed out and identify at the beginning of your project what are those things that you're not going to produce, not going to create, not going to add, that the customer may be assuming that they are. And my favorite of these is training. Because we roll out new systems, and especially when we do IT work and we're rolling out some new software or a new computer system or a new business system, it's assumed the training is going to be included. Now, if I'm a software developer and my sole focus is around developing software, I'm not even going to be thinking about training. I'm thinking about writing the software and getting it out and getting into production, doing all that detail. And there's lots of details there. So I'm not even thinking about that. So I'm going to say, well, what's in scope is, write the software and put it into production and set up user accounts. And then out of scope training, of course, because I don't do that, right? But then, of course, when you get to the acceptance at the end and they're going, well, where's the training? I need my staff trained. And now we've got it into an issue. So you want to have these discussions at the beginning. Years ago, I stopped accepting scope statements where the out of scope read everything not listed is in scope. If that ever came to me, I would hand it back to whoever wrote it and say, this is not acceptable, go rewrite it. Because it's a waste of ink. Like, seriously, you may as well just take that right out altogether, right? The purpose here is to list the things that you think may be assumed as in, to list the things that logically kind of should be in, but you know what? Our project is to just deliver this one piece, and there's another project that's going to do the next piece. List those as out of scope. It's setting the boundaries. It's to prevent scope creep so that we don't add things in that logically should be there, but they're being dealt with by someone else, right? That kind of thing. Acceptance criteria. I'm going to come back to that one. Constraint, specifications, approvals, any assumptions along the way. So we want to detail those for sure. Acceptance criteria, in my humble opinion, is one of the most important things in your scope statement, because this is going to define how the customer is going to evaluate and hence accept the product. So, I take my mug here and it's like, okay, I want you to build me this mug, right? It's this big and all that. Now, the question now becomes, how am I going to test this mug, right? Well, I could test it by maybe freezing it with liquid nitrogen and whacking it with a hammer, right? Because maybe I'm planning to take this down to my expedition to Antarctica. Now, this is a ceramic mug. It's not going to pass that test. You can easily build me that mug, right? We have the materials and the technology to do that, but you need to know the acceptance criteria, right? Maybe my acceptance criteria is to drop this mug from 5 feet above the ground onto concrete. Again, ceramic mug, it's not going to work, right? But you could build me that mug. So figure out what the acceptance criteria is, because that's going to be the end of your project, folks. That's going to be, hey, we're done, here it is. The customer's now going to take that product, whatever it is, and they're going to go drop it from 5 feet above the ground onto concrete or whatever they're going to do with it, right? We need to know that ahead of time. Okay, let's take a quick look at a sample acceptance. So here's work package 3.2.1. It's an exterior statue. So we're doing a building renovation. We're prettying it up. We're putting some gardens in, all that kind of stuff. So here's the acceptance criteria. The height to pass, and you can, when you define your acceptance criteria, you can define a pass, you can define a fail, right? So for example, if we're doing like a light switch electrical, the pass might be when I flip the switch on, the lights come on. The fail might be if I flip the switch on, the building catches fire. That's a fail, right? That kind of thing. So the height, 1 to 3 meters. So about 3 feet to 10 feet. Okay. Color, natural stone, right? So we want kind of a natural stone color. And then a fail would be nudity, suggestive pose, or attire, right? Okay. So we've got a pretty clear picture of what we're looking for. So I want to show you this picture, and this is the Kentucky Knob sculpture. And this is an actual art installation, by the way. So one of our associates, Mike, was on vacation a few years back, and he saw this and took a picture of it. Now, let's look at our acceptance criteria. It was less than 10 feet tall. It was more than 3 feet. So it's 1 to 3 meters. It's definitely stone in color, and there's definitely no nudity or suggestive pose here. So based on those criteria, it's acceptable. Now, you kind of look at that and go, but dude, we wanted a sculpture. Well, it is. This was an actual art installation. So yeah. Now, when you get into construction, we have the beauty of drawings. We have the beauty of, doing the design ahead of time, and you can, go through and approve that. And it can seem quite arduous and annoying and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, the better we do our job there, the easier it is at the other end, because now I can take those detailed drawings, I can hand them to the construction folks and say, build this. And as long as they build to the drawing, my customer's accepting, right? So it is, a little bit of fun with that one, but we look at how are we going to define our acceptance criteria, okay? What does that look like? Now, we've alluded to a little bit of Agile through our discussions today, and I just want to kind of wrap up that piece by talking about the planning horizon. And this is really when we're getting down to the WBS. This is really when we're getting down to the how. And one of the criticisms of waterfall is that you have to do everything ahead of time. You got to define your scope fully before you can take that first step forward, and that's not at all what PMBOK is actually saying. The planning horizon, or rolling wave, is the tool around this. If you think about a 3-year project, you cannot plan in detail your project all 3 years. I can't schedule your time 2.5 years from now for a particular job because that's what the WBS is all about. Remember, it's the work breakdown structure. It's about getting down to that lowest level of detail, the work package, breaking that down into the activities, and then scheduling that. And that's the essence of why we do all of this. So we use something called a planning horizon, which is a very simple question of how far into the future can you plan at a detailed level? And you're looking at about 3 to 6 months max. Now, there is a slight exception to that when you get into seasonal work, where we'll often schedule things like kind of a year out based on a seasonal flow. But the reality is you're kind of planning in about a 3 to 6 month window. Now, if we go to Agile, you're planning on a 3 to 6 week or a 3 to 6 day window where you do that plan, you do that work, you do that plan. And the analogy that we're using here is a mountain climber. So there you are at base camp. You're about to step off. You're going to head up Everest, Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3, the summit, Camp 4, Camp 5 on the way down the other side. And what we're looking at is you can plan your ascent from base camp to Camp 1. Once you get to Camp 1, you can now plan your ascent in detail to Camp 2, and so on. And this is what the concept of the planning horizon or rolling wave is all about. And this is what we need to do when we're looking at scope, when we're looking at managing our project, is we need to plan at a very detailed level those shorter hops, those shorter steps. Okay. So you want to kind of put that out there, and we're still going to have a high-level plan for the 3 years. We're going to know our milestones, our key points. We're going to know what Camp 3 looks like. We know our acceptance criteria, right? Using the mountain climber analogy here, the acceptance criteria is that we've reached the summit with enough energy, resources, food and oxygen left to be able to make it back down, for example, right? So we want to make sure that, yes, we know what our acceptances and what our destinations look like. It's the detailed planning that we're going to do in those phases and those chunks. So where does all this fit? Well, the charter is really about defining the why. And if you're in the middle of doing a scope statement, if you're in the middle of trying to define your scope and you don't have a clear picture of that why, you should be asking that question. You should be kind of stepping back and saying, why are we doing this, right? Have we figured that out? Your scope statement is your deliverables of your product. It's your what. And then your project management plan is how. And the how includes the timing, the costing, the actual individual resources, that kind of stuff. You will have a high-level plan for the 3 years, but you're going to have a detailed plan for the next 3 to 6 months. And then as you approach the end of that 3 to 6 months, you've already been building your next 3 to 6 month detailed plan and so on. So what are the key points here? We need to optimize our scope. We need to get the scope back down to address the need to haves, the whys. We need to work at a manageable level. So hence, when we are looking at the 3-year plan, or we're looking at a higher level, because we can't manage a detailed 3-year plan. When we're looking at 3 to 6 month plan, then we're going to be managing at a higher level of detail. Deliver the right things right. So make sure that we are staying in alignment with our why. Deliver the right things. And then we need to deliver them right, which means for that regulatory project with the December 31st midnight deadline, it's delivered December 31st at midnight. That's the delivering the right piece. Now, if I deliver something that doesn't meet the needs, that is not going to enable us to be compliant with that new regulation, I've missed my target. And then be flexible while retaining focus. And that it almost sounds like an oxymoron here. I need to stay focused on my why. I need to stay focused on the goal that I'm after here, but while retaining flexibility on how I get there, the work that gets done, as well as some flexibility around the what, right? And this is, when I reflect back on the experience of the human-powered helicopter project, this was something that was being attempted, well, really since Da Vinci's time, because he did the first drawings ever, but for 35 years, that challenge has been put out to the engineering industry from the Sikorsky Helicopter Corporation. And for 35 years, people were saying it's impossible, right? But this team that I was very fortunate to be a member of, they retained focus on the goal while they had extreme flexibility on how they were going to get there. And you know what? It works, folks. It really does. Some common pitfalls just to kind of help wrap this up. Scope baseline is not properly established. Scope is not integrated into the environment, so hence things not being used. We need to have some standard evaluation for those change requests. inadequate documentation. Now, inadequate doesn't mean too little, it means wrong, which means I can have too much documentation that's unreadable. No periodic review. We talked about being flexible. You need to periodically review, are we on track? Has the needs changed? Are we delivering what's needed? The scope not clearly communicated, so hence the project scope may be clearly defined but not clearly communicated. And then, of course, any scope change not being integrated into the overall project. Do not be afraid to re-baseline your projects. If things aren't going to plan, you need to re-baseline because we need to change and update our schedule so that we let Joe know that, hey, I don't need you, August 1st, I need you September 1st. Why that's happened, that's another discussion. And we're going to look at that when we get into lessons learned at the end of our, near the end of our time. Okay. So these are kind of really the three basic ones that I really wanted to highlight today. The scope baseline not being established, the scope not being integrated into the environment. So hence we got to make sure that that product, when we're done, does work back in. And then we need to constantly review. You're doing that 3-year project. You need to constantly, periodically be reviewing where are we at, how are we doing, are we still on track? I'm going to finish up with a little bit of a fun thing. I'm sure many of you have seen this. Here's what the customer explained it. Okay, or here's how the customer explained it. Here's how the project leader understood it. Here is how the analyst designed it. Here's how the programmer wrote it. Here's how the business consultant described it. I think I'm guilty as charged on that one. Here's how the team documented it. I'm definitely guilty on that one. I'm bad for documentation. All right. Here's what was actually implemented. Here's how it was billed. Here's how it was supported. And then finally, here's what was really needed. And the moral of this story here is we need to make sure that that first one and the last one connect. Right? Because if the customer actually explained it the way that they really needed it, and we saw that in a few of your comments where a few of you said, you know what, customers are not telling us properly what they need. And this is where your business analyst is worth their weight in gold because they help your customers work through that. So if you're starting to get that spidey sense of they haven't thought through this, might be time to engage a BA into that. All right, let's close this off. If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. And this really goes back to what is the real problem? What's the problem, need, or opportunity? What's the root to all of this? We really need to get that sorted out. And if you're stepping into the project partway through or you've been told that that's already been done, do you have a clearer picture of that? And make it as simple as possible, but not simpler. So let's make sure that we're breaking this down to the very simple terms and really getting it into as simple as possible, but again, not too simple. So thank you guys so much. Our next one is coming up in August. I forgot the date off the top of my head, but that'll be in the email. And we're going to be taking a look at time in our continuing series of 10. I'm going to leave this open for a few minutes for any questions that popped up. And one question from Kim, will the slides be shared? Short answer, no. We don't share our slides, but what we do is we record these sessions and we will make the recording available to you so you can rewatch it. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this open for a few minutes, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to use either the question parking lot or the chat. And seeing a bunch of people typing, we'll just give it a few moments. And of course, there's your code for your PDU. Okay, so my email and my phone number is there. If anyone does have any questions that pop up and want to drop a line and say things. Oh, sorry. Jennifer, I am a new PM and I'm not familiar with how to report PDUs for continuing education. So go to pmi.org and I think it's under certification and then maintenance or continuing. Look for CCR. It's their continuing certification requirements. And when you go in there, it'll be under category A, which is from a registered education provider. You just enter in that code, look for us in the drop-down, and you should be fine with that. If you have any difficulty, just send me an email, and I'll send you some screenshots. Great as always. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, guys. Can't do this without you. I appreciate your ongoing support for these series of webinars. And I do invite you, if you have any topics or ideas that you'd like to have explored, you know what, fire us an email. All right, take care, folks, and we'll see you next time.